Hello and welcome to iCatholic. I'm Wendy Grace. Well, we're going to continue our discussion on the Synod and Synodality, and our next guest joins us from Venezuela. He's a Venezuelan theologian and he's been participating in the Synod. It's great to have with us Rafael Luciani. Rafael, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Wendy, for the invitation. I'm really happy to be able to share about synodality and the whole process that we're living in the church today.
So I think that's a good place to start, Rafael, is that even though many people might have heard some discussions on this, and even those participating in them, we're still trying to get our heads around what is synodality?
Yeah, it's not a new practice in the church. It was a practice of the first millennium. We can remember bishops like Saint Cyprian in Carthage, where he had always as a rule in his episcopacy to ask advice and also at the same time to build consensus. So we're trying today to recover this practice, no? To listen to the people, take advice, and then trying from there to discern together and build consensus where we all feel represented.
And have you, in your experience to date, seen that the understanding of synodality is actually being lived out in the process, if that makes sense?
Yeah, in fact, there is an interesting statement in the document for the continental stage where people were saying, this is the first time I've been consulted and I am living synodality. It's not a theory, it's something that we're living. So I think that by practice, by experience, we learn more about synodality, and this is something that we have to enhance and embrace and keep doing all over the world.
Why do you think that Pope Francis started this process?
Because we cannot change the church by individuals or small groups. We need to get involved, and his view comes from the ecclesiology of the people of God, the image of the church as an ecclesial we. We can use that phrase, an ecclesial we. But that has implications because that means that I, as a lay, for example, or you need to be consulted and not simply left behind until a decision is made by someone. So this involvement of every person in the church is part of what he understands that should be the way of proceeding to bring about conversion and reform to the church.
Tell me a little bit, Rafael, about what you've been hearing from the Venezuelan people, from Latin America as part of this listening exercise. What are the issues that are being brought up in Latin America?
Yes, throughout the consulting phase, the listening phase, we have heard a lot of topics. So, for example, ministries, how communities where you don't have right now a priest, like regions in the Amazon, for example, we need to rethink the presence of the church as a pastoral and a ministerial institution. I remember that in the Synod for the Pan-Amazonian, we heard testimonies of sisters that were leading and coordinating communities. And that's something that today came out again. How do we think a church where each one of us, and not only the priest, can coordinate the life of a community?
In terms of just your own experience, in Latin America, in Venezuela, some might say in that part of the world, you've perhaps been living synodality for quite some time. And what can we learn from that?
I think we have had some experiences that today are deepened. So, for example, after the council, one of the key experiences of the Latin American church was the conference of Medellin in 1968. And it's interesting because the bishops there at the beginning were working as an episcopal gathering. And little by little, they were interacting with lay people, religious presbyters, and suddenly the method they used changed. And that method is still today alive, which is everybody has to be listened, everybody has to participate in discernment. And when a bishop takes a decision, that decision has been built up from the bottom to the top. So that's an experience that we have been doing after the council. And today, I think it's taking another path. It's being deepened much more with this figure of the Continental Assembly, not anymore an episcopal assembly, but a continental ecclesial assembly.
I imagine that, of course, one of the hopes for anybody participating in this process is, well, there has to be concrete actions, there has to be conversion both personally and on many other levels. Do you think that that's going to happen?
Yes, I had an experience here in Venezuela recently because we had a national pastoral assembly for us. That is an institution that does every couple of years a nationwide consultation. It's a permanent consultation organism. And I was in a group where a bishop said something that in the group was not correctly. And a young lady stood up and said, well, Bishop, you said this, but my expertise in my knowledge and my experiences, this, and I can say, something about it. And well, at the end, it's interesting because the bishop changed because he listened to the person and according to her experience and her knowledge. And that created an atmosphere where everybody could talk, could speak freely, and we could feel that it was really a changing experience. I think that's the key in synodality: face-to-face, dialoguing, knowing the other's experience, and then we can do decision-making.
I think one of the things, Rafael, is when people hear some of the things we've been talking about, whether it's using that language of reform or change, conversion, there is a kind of human nature response of fear. Well, what will this change mean? And does reform mean, changing things that are near and dear to me, really important parts of my faith? Do you think that fear is justified?
Well, the church in its tradition has always lived processes of reform. This is not the first time, not a new one. In fact, if we go to the Council of Trent, one of the reforms that the council implemented was the creation of parishes and the creation of seminaries, and to make mandatory for the dioceses to celebrate a synod every year. So that was a reform. Today we're living a stage also in the church of a new process of reform. And why do we call it reform? Because the church needs to update its structures, not only the mentality. Imagine that you go to a parish and you continue to see the same parish today as you saw it 30 or 40 years ago. Something is wrong there. So we need to update because the new signs of the times, what is happening in the world, needs the church to be present in its whole mission, responding to that reality, not to 40 or 50 years ago.
Some people might think, okay, well, what if it's a changing of structures, but we end up, instead of having maybe clerics at the top of the pyramid, that we just have, influential lay people who have, strong voices at the top, and we have another situation where the average churchgoer feels they're sidelined.
Yeah, the image of the pyramid is sometimes tricky because, like you're saying, it seems like the ones in the bottom are going to be now in the top. And the ones in the top now in the bottom. We may use another image, which is the reciprocity or secularity, or what the Pope talks about, the polyhedric image, which means everyone should be recognized by its own charisms, gifts, services, and that complementarity is what synodality is about. So taking into account each one for what each one can contribute, and not simply the bishop or the pastor or the lay isolated. I think that's a change of mentality, but this is not new in the church. It was the practice of the first millennium in this beautiful church in our tradition.
And at this point in the process, Rafael, what are the things that you think can be taken back to Venezuela, to Latin America in general, practical actions that can be taken now?
Yeah, the need to use the pastoral councils at all levels, from parish to diocesan pastoral councils, as an organism or as an institution where you can have a representation of all the faithful in that local church, and all of them discerning and decision-making together. I think that's one of the things that we already have, and it's provided by canon law, but we need to do that as a mandatory instance in the church, because if not, we cannot let things to the decision of one individual.
That sounds like a lovely proposition, but because it's a big change in many areas, it's actually trying to get commitment from people in the parish to these things, that they'll actually give of their time, give of their gifts, and getting them to put their hand up and say, yes, I will be part of that, I will participate.
Yeah, but I think that comes when you as a person in a community feel empowered and recognized as a person, and not simply being asked to do certain things in the parish. In my diocese here in Venezuela, it's called La Guaira. The bishop just launched 2 months ago a reform, and we started by the small communities with pastoral councils in each small community, and that created a lay leadership. So you need to be recognized as a person in the church in order to assume a commitment. I think that's a key attitude that we need to build in the church.
I know that there has been a convergence of particular issues from all over the world, but is there anything in particular that you would like people watching to know that this is what Latin America is trying to say to the body of Christ?
I think that the way in which we are trying to proceed in the church, which means to build us as an ecclesial we, and us to be together and to work together, not simply to be in the same place together, but to take in consideration the other person as equal as I am, as baptized. So I think we as a Latin American church are learning this every day more, and we are learning it by practice. This is also the key of synodality. By practice, I mean that through small groups, discernments, we're trying to change mentalities in the church, but you cannot do that without a practice. One of the practices is called spiritual conversations, which in small groups, we try to listen, discern, and elaborate a consensus altogether. That's new, I think, and that can be enhanced much more.
Well, Rafael, it's been great to just have you with us and have you sharing with us all that you've been learning as part of this process, and I'm sure we'll connect up with you again. Thank you so much for joining us on iCatholic today.
Thank you, Wendy. It was my pleasure.
Thanks so much for joining us on iCatholic today. Please make sure that you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.